Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Coming up today on The Story.
So one of our first neighbours that we met, her name was Pooh, P-O-O. We loved Pooh. She would cook food out the front of her house, and so it was terrific. Actually, when my mother-in-law would come over, the kids used to love it and say, Omar, we're having Pooh food for dinner tonight. And Omar would, tut-tut at them, and what kind of food? It's Pooh food, But Pooh became a good friend to our family.
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colfax. Welcome to The Story. Well, what would cause a family to leave everything in Australia to live for several years in a slum in Bangkok, Thailand? We'll find out today as Dr. Ash Barker shares his and his family's story. Also, we'll hear how an unusually named book garnered worldwide attention and helped to bring work to many of the people living in that slum. Ash is chatting with Eric Scatterbo in our Melbourne studios.
Welcome to the program, Dr. Ash Barker.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you with us. And so we're going to talk about your time in the slum in Bangkok, Thailand, leaving everything to go there. But actually, the story goes back before that, because for a while you lived in a low socioeconomic area here in Melbourne. Is that right?
Yep. So we lived in Springvale, which is a very multiracial, multicultural community. We'd been working with Youth for Christ and working in prisons and youth detention centres. And we were finding once kids were in the system, it was really difficult. And so how could we prevent young people going to the systems, or would go where they were from? And in Melbourne, these kids weren't coming from every neighbourhood. They were only coming from a few neighbourhoods. So we started youth clubs and camping programs and mentoring programs as part of Youth for Christ response to urban young people.
And I should interrupt you there because you keep on saying we. Tell us about how you met your wife.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, Ange and I both stood up at a Tony Campolo meeting as 18-year-olds, ready to go anywhere for the cause of Christ. This idea that Jesus, after what Jesus has done for me, there's nothing I wouldn't do for him. Out of gratitude, we would give our lives, surrender our lives to Christ. Ange and I both made those commitments separately. We met 6 months later.
Oh, is that right? I thought you were at the same meeting.
We were at the same meeting, but we weren't together.
Is that right?
We only met 6 months later.
Oh, wow.
She thought she was going to Haiti. I thought I was going to China for some reason. We fell madly in love. We got married as 20-year-olds.
But you both had a heart for helping economically needy people?
Yeah.
What was the common denominator?
Matthew 25:31, the idea of the sheep and the goats, that as we do it to the least of these, we do it to Jesus. Something spiritual happens when we engage those who are suffering and those who are hurting. And I think for both Ange and I, that caught our imagination and our hearts. And we started where we were. I was in Dingley at running youth groups and drop-in centres and working in schools as volunteers. And Ange was working with homeless people in a Balcom infusion kind of centre. And I think both of us were kind of say, is this the real deal? Is this just a phase we're going through? Or is this what we're committed to? And I think both of us were worried about committing to people who wouldn't go all the way with God, that we really wanted to surrender our whole lives to God. And so we met each other, we fell madly in love. And so we got married as 20-year-olds. So we were quite young when we got married. Yeah. And started with Youth for Christ very quickly. So Ange was still finishing her social work degree. I was finishing my theology degree, but working in juvenile detention centres initially.
And so you mentioned that you were in the area of Springvale.
Yes.
On the east side of Melbourne. What brought about you living there?
Yeah, so Dingley is where I grew up and where Ange and I first moved to when we were married. And we were it was when a lot of Vietnamese refugees were coming. We had our initial work in Dingley, youth clubs, and then needs really were just over the border. So it was not far away, Springvale, really. In fact, in those days, Dingley was part of the city of Springvale.
Oh, okay.
But it was a more affluent part of the city. And then we moved into the city centre really to follow up with the young people, particularly Pacific Islanders, Vietnamese refugees, Cambodians, and to open our homes and lives together. We started churches. We started a group called Urban Neighbours of Hope. So that's really where the approach came from. Living right next to the train station. In Springvale in those days had a quite serious heroin problem. So it was not uncommon to have young people dying on our front nature strip. I still remember Ange was ringing the phone, ringing the ambulance. Ash, someone's dropped. So I ran down, and there was no pulse, there was no breath. I'm about to, do mouth to mouth, and I'm just praying, really, Lord, please do something.
Yeah.
And he came back to life actually while I was
wow.
there. And I don't know who was more stunned, me or him. I didn't quite know what to do. Bible college hadn't really prepared for me.
Wasn't one of your classes, huh?
to come back to life on your front nature trip. So I did the best I could. Would you like to come up for a cup of tea upstairs? So we came upstairs, and we heard his story, and he just come out of prison. This was a harsh dose of heroin that he wasn't prepared for, and I said, look, there's all kinds of reasons why you're here now, but we prayed, and you're here, and God has a plan for your life. And I think those kinds of experiences, while they didn't happen all the time, they really formed us. I think we found two lessons, really. One, that when we love people and are open to God's love and help introduce people to Jesus, that miracles can happen. People's lives can change. And we saw that happening. Churches started, etc. But also our lives change. That when people don't change, a second miracle can happen, that we become more compassionate. We find
when they don't change?
Yeah, when other people don't change, we change. And
How does that work?
Well, for example, one of the young men we got to know was part of our youth club. His name was Metakore. His name means no parent in Pacific Island language, and his grandfather was struggling. There was so many kids in the house. He hadn't got to year 7. And his grandfather said, would you take, Metakore on? I said, well, he's part of my small group. Then would you take him on like your son? And so I better talk to Ange about that.
Yeah.
And I talked to Ange, and Ange said, of course, this is why we've moved to Springvale. If we can't take up a kid who's named Metakore, no parent, what are we doing? And so he became part of our life, and we got him through the whole of year 8. He was a real character, a very, very funny kid. We found out he actually had an intellectual disability. Later that year, he was about 14, I think it was, when his girlfriend had a baby, and Christine was born. And that just kind of, the psychiatric kind of stuff really kicked in at that point. Started seeing faces in trees and becoming really paranoid, thought little baby Christine was trying to kill him, and smashed windows and tried to break down doors to get at her. And we loved him and we cared for him and believed that God would somehow heal and intervene. We went to hundreds of meetings with in and out of jails and hospitals and social workers, but he died actually. He got the phone call from the police saying, would you come and identify the body? And I still remember the funeral. Cook Island funerals are really kind of powerful. They're big events. And
very emotional.
Very emotional. People yelling and screaming, and you have an open casket. And I still remember kissing his forehead like others and saying, you didn't change the way we wanted. We prayed, and but I'm a different person. You took me to the edge. You took me to the margins. You showed me the way the world really is. Later, I reflected.
Well, I was just going to say, at that point, somebody could say, what am I doing here? I'm not even making a difference.
Yeah.
He's passed away. Throw in the towel.
Yeah.
But you're saying it made you a better person?
Yes, it did. I don't know if you remember the movie Titanic. There's Rose on the top deck. And my life, by having great Christian parents, having really good people who loved me around me, it was a top deck kind of experience. And Metakore was like my Jack in the movie, who showed me the way the world really is. And so actually I became more determined because of the way the world really was, that so much suffering was going on, that I wanted to try and prevent this happening for other people. And a sense of call birthed in both Ange and I out of that tragedy, that his legacy, Methuselah, wouldn't die in vain, that we would dedicate our lives to seeing lives change through Jesus, and that we would invest everything we had to do that. And Urban Neighbours of Hope started really, and it continues on. And at one point it was in 6 different cities around the world, and workers were doing this, caring, standing with people, seeing people's skills and assets be developed, and social enterprises and churches and youth groups and football clubs, all kinds of things would come out of standing with people in solidarity and sharing our lives and sharing Jesus. So that was a really important part of our journey.
Okay, and so that was in the Melbourne
That's
area.
in Melbourne, yeah.
How do we get from there to the slums of Bangkok?
Yeah, we still felt that maybe we did have a chapter in us to go to some of the world's poorest. And so we thought, we've got a sabbatical coming up. Maybe we should spend our time in Vietnam. We work with a lot of
Now,
Vietnamese
when people have some time off, they'll go to Hawaii or something. You decided to go to the slums of...
Yeah, well, initially to Vietnam, actually, because we thought maybe because we spoke Vietnamese, worked with a lot of Vietnamese young people.
Oh, okay, so you already had that familiarity with the culture.
Yeah, in Vietnam.
Yep.
But actually, we couldn't get a visa long term, and so a friend of mine was at the Australian Embassy in Bangkok, and he said, "Well, come to." He knew us very well. We were youth group together. Mick said to us, "Come to Bangkok. There's great slums here in Bangkok. You'll love it."
We got some great ones here.
This is 1999, and we'd started Urban Neighbours over in '93, so it was kind of a good time to take stock of where we were going. And actually, we fell in love with the place. And a year later, I went to visit the families we stayed with. Ange had been working in an AIDS hospice. I'd been teaching football and English and writing a book. And I saw the families again. Blah and her family particularly had been very kind to us. And I just, as I walked into the slum again, I just felt this sense I was home. This is where I was supposed to be. And I didn't quite know what to do with it. I went back to Ange and said, I do wonder. Amy was about 4 years old at that point.
Your daughter?
Our daughter. And there was that kind of sense that if we went before she started, getting fully into school, we kind of had some windows. And I'm trying to explain this rationally to Ange, but actually it was this intuition, really, that God wanted us to be at home in Klong Toi slum. I mean, it's a slum of 100,000 people, 2 square kilometres. And Ange didn't blink. In fact, she burst into tears. That, oh no, now I've done it. But she said, I thought we had to give up this dream. We talked about this as teenagers, and to have the opportunity to do it would be amazing. Now, it took about 18 months to be able to be in discernment and find out what we needed and find visas and partners. We really wanted to work with the Church of Christ in Thailand, which was the indigenous church, and then be invited in. Amazingly, the head of our board at that time, John Gilmore, knew the head of the Church of Christ in Thailand, Dr. Sint, and he said, wow, if you're interested in Klong Toi, we've actually got a community centre.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Ash Barker is sharing his story and the events that led to him and his family leaving everything in Australia to live for several years in a slum in Bangkok, Thailand. Next, we'll hear what life was like living in that slum and about an unusually named book written by one of their neighbours that garnered worldwide attention. That and more when we return.
The Story. If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colfax and this is The Story. Today, Dr. Ash Barker is sharing his story and about his lifelong work of ministering to people in poor urban neighbourhoods. Before the break, we heard about how he and his wife lived in a multicultural part of Melbourne. Next, we'll hear what it was like to live and minister to people in a slum in Bangkok, Thailand, and about how an unusually named book changed the lives of a number of people who live there.
And so, we spent 12 years in Klong Toi. It was incredibly demanding place. Dengue fever 4 times, dysentery, typhoid, typhus, all those kind of things that your body's just not used to living in open sewers and rats and all that kind of stuff. But it had such a profound impact to us. Well, you mentioned the book, the unusual name.
Tell the story behind that one, please.
Yeah, so one of our first neighbours that we met, her name was Poo, P-O-O. We loved Poo. She was one of
Which was short for?
Shampoo. So shampoo is a fruit, but everyone called her Poo, and we thought that was quite funny. She would cook food out the front of her house, and so it was terrific. Actually, when my mother-in-law would come over, the kids used to love it and say, Omar, we're having Poo food for dinner tonight. And Omar would, tut at them, and what kind of food, it's poo food, So we loved it. We thought it was quite funny. We didn't speak a lot of Thai when we first went there. We were in school there, learning the language. It was really tough. But Pooh became a good friend to our family. One day the price of rice went through the roof. Basically, the subsidies of the rice was taken off, and so the price of rice went through the roof, but people's wages didn't go up. And Pooh, being a Buddhist person, really hoped that her luck would change. She went to the temple and all those kind of things to try and see whether her luck would change. She kept selling the food at that price and was starting to get into serious debt. When you get into debt in a place like Klong Toi, the debt people are incredibly dangerous. It's basically organised crime groups that do that. So she was quite scared. She came to Ange one day and said, look, is there some way you can get me a job out of the slum maybe? And she had 2 boys, a husband that wasn't working a lot at that point. And so she really was, working from 5 in the morning till 9 at night and still losing money.
Wow.
So Ange said, well, you're such a great cook. Why don't you start a cooking school? It will be great fun. You're such good company with people. People would love it. And people pay a fortune here, foreigners, to learn how to cook Thai food. It's known all around the world.
It's a new thing. What do they call that? Cooking tourism or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Ange, we had some friends come over. Pooh initially said, look, I couldn't do that. I don't have enough English. I don't have But we helped her learn English. And when we had friends come over, she said, well, just try it out, So you take them to the local market. Markets in Bangkok are crazy. There's cockroaches that are fried to eat, and you've got frogs with their stomachs cut open, the heart still beating. And so it's quite a freaky kind of market. And then to buy the food for the ingredients and then take them back to her house and teach people how to cook. Yeah. Nutritious, quick, easy Thai meals. People loved it. And so when we launched the cooking school, it became the number 1 thing to do on TripAdvisor within 6 months. Number 2 was the Grand Palace. But the book you're talking about was a friend of ours here from Melbourne, actually. Was a brilliant photographer. And she said, why don't you do a cookbook? And so Ange worked with Pooh to do the ingredients and tell stories in the community. And then Shelley came over and took these brilliant photographs of the community and the food. Mm-hmm. And then we're talking with a journalist friend, how do we, market this? How do we get it out there? And Ange came up with the idea, why don't we call the book Cooking with Pooh? And to this day, they've not spent a cent in marketing. It sold 40,000 copies. The big breakthrough came when someone put the book in the Frankfurt Book Fair, the biggest book fair in the world. Wow. And it won the title of Oddest Book Title of the Year. Then comedians all around the world picked it up. And Pooh cooked with Jamie Oliver. Is that right? And they did a show. If you look up Cooking with Pooh and Jamie Oliver, you'll see Jamie Oliver cooking right next to Pooh and learning. And the apron says, I cooked with Pooh, and I liked it. And but the great thing about that isn't just this huge amount of income that was being brought in.
Yeah, she was in a desperate situation. So this is an answer to prayer in itself.
It was, and she really saw it as a gift from God. Interesting, when I tried to launch my book, Slum Life Rising, my PhD work on the rise of slums, and you need all the help you can get. So I have my celebrity chef friend, Pooh, come to the Foreign Correspondents Press Club. But the first question went to Pooh. And it was a really good question. It said, well, you're so successful, Pooh, with your book and with your cooking school, but you've got 2 boys and you continue to live in Klong Toi slum, most notorious slum in Bangkok. Why do you stay if you don't need to? And she said, well, I'm not as wealthy as you might think. What we've been doing is keeping this money separate into a charity, and we help other people start small businesses. Because I used to have to work from 5 in the morning till 9 at night. And if we didn't, and even then, sometimes we wouldn't make. So I can never have a holiday, never have a day off. Well, now I can have a holiday. Now I can have days off. And I want other people to have the same blessings that I have had. And so she stays. And we were just there with her in July. And she's still this vibrant, wonderful person who's impacted so many people's lives. I think you talk about Miracle A's for other people's lives being transformed. The number of people's lives, not every day, the people who come to a cooking school, but also the small businesses, the church she's part of, and the joy that she brings to so many. It's just kind of a privilege. But you could never generate that yourself. You could never come with a marketing plan. Okay, we're going to find someone with a funny name and market a book and sell 40,000 copies. It doesn't work like that. It works from the ground up. That as we seek to join with what God is doing in a community, it's amazing what fruit can come. but it's a special place, and even going back there just last month and seeing all our folks, hundreds of people people never forget even the smallest thing that we've done over the years. People remembered and were grateful, and we felt it was such a big part of our lives and such a big influence on our theology and the way we view God, but also the friendships that were generated in that cauldron have kept us in good stead.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but you said you've gone back there because that's not where you are. You've gone on to another economically depressed area in the world.
Yeah, so we really felt like our next season in life was how do we invest in urban leaders? And we wanted to demonstrate that, and so we had an opportunity to work in inner city Birmingham. It's a tough neighbourhood, the big, massive prison there, 1,600 prisoners. There was a documentary made about our neighbourhood called Benefit Street, which showed the depravity and the struggle that was happening in that community. And we took over an old disused vicarage and all the kind of things we did in Bangkok with social enterprise to really demonstrate what were going on. But then the trick is, how do we mobilize and support and grow leaders from within communities like that all around the country?
Obviously, you're having a positive impact on the parts of the world that you've been in the economically poor area in the Melbourne area, then the slum of Bangkok, and now in another economically depressed part of Birmingham, England. But what if somebody said, okay, that's nice, you're helping people get jobs and income, but what about the spiritual impact? What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to separate the spiritual from the physical. As Christians, we believe the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood, that God values the physical and is present. And so I don't think it's as simple as saying this is the spiritual bit, this is the physical bit. It's all integrated. So for us, Jesus is about life and having life in abundance and fullness. And so what we want to see happen is people to encounter this Jesus who will give them life. And so we give opportunity for that as part of what we're doing. It's a normal part of our life. It doesn't have to be an extra bit. It isn't even a bit that we're going to give you food and come to this community meal, but what we really want you to do is come along to our church. No, we're feeding people, enabling people to have food and being involved in as friends and part of the community. All that's good. And so sharing Jesus becomes a natural part of our life. And so people will come, want that opportunity to go deeper. I think there's different kind of on-ramps for that, but we want to make sure people want to do it as a response to Jesus, not just out of manipulation. Sometimes with vulnerable people, and you see this, I see this all the time in Bangkok actually, a lot, where people, the so-called rice Christians, that will offer you rice if you become a Christian, and
kind of a conditional love.
Conditional love, and poor folk will sometimes, who are desperate enough, will do it for the moment, and they'll go through the motions.
But it's not genuine. It's from the heart.
Not genuine. It's not from the heart. In fact, people become very resentful of Christians, and Christians have a bad name for doing that. So we wanted to make sure that people are interested in following Jesus, knowing more about the life that shines in us.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you want to genuinely love people.
Yes.
And then once they feel loved, they'll want to know, well, what are you about? There's something different about you.
That's right.
So that's more of a genuine response.
Yeah, and yes, that's right. And I think when people respond when we're genuine with people and people are genuine with us, that Jesus is found in the middle of those discussions and relationships. And sometimes there is this mystical kind of encounter. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he says, when you do it to the least of these, you do it to me. That we find Jesus in that. We encounter Jesus through the other person, and the other person encounters Jesus through us. It's mystical, it's spiritual. I don't know how to explain it, but I know it happens. I know people sense Jesus' presence being close. And our message to everybody was that Jesus is not far away from any one of us, and that if we reach out to him, he's reaching out to each of us anyway. And so we just need to respond to him, and he will. It is about surrender. It is about giving up our lives, but we move half a step to Jesus. Jesus moves a full step to us, and that's a story of grace and the faithfulness of God to each of us if we're open to it.
Amen. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That was Dr. Ash Barker sharing his story. He's currently the director of New Begin, School of Urban Leadership located in Birmingham, England. It was great to hear how Ash and his wife have a heart for helping people in poor economic circumstances in various areas around the world. As the Bible says in Matthew 25 verse 40, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." For more information about Dr. Ash Barker and his ministry work in England, their website is newbeginhouse.uk. That's newbeginhouse.uk. Well, thanks for joining us for Ash's inspiring story. I'm Jimmy Colfax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
It was quite an emotional morning, and it was full of trepidation. So many things we'd been told about how the baby could be deformed, how just funny things that go through your mind that can be so scary because you have no idea how to respond or how to feel or what the outcome's going to be.
In 1998, Sarah Jollicoe was 15 weeks pregnant with her second child when she received some devastating news. The doctors said her baby did not have all the required body parts to survive outside of the womb. Sarah shares how the Lord guided her and her husband through the challenges they faced next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is connecting faith to life.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.